Welcome to another Ocean Ideas Talk, brought to you by ocean lovers.
Now I'm delighted to continue a conversation that we started this time last year, but we definitely need to continue. So this is your chance to hear about how traditional and contemporary Indigenous ocean governance is working with modern science to benefit the health of our ocean. We have a third panel member who is going to join us just as soon as possible, but I am delighted to introduce Kataya Barret, who is a Thank you. Please do come to the stage. Who is a Gumbaynggirr and Bundjalung woman from the north coast of New South Wales. With salt water in her veins and a burning curiosity, she's on a journey to help care for and save our underwater world, focusing on ways to centre Indigenous science in coastal and marine planning. She is the Saltwater and Planning Project Officer with Country Needs People, working with Aboriginal communities to plan and protect sea country. And joining Kataya is Sarah Gorst, who is a Kamilaroi woman born and raised in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales. Also a marine conservation advocate and co-founder of South Coast Seaweed, which I'm going to have to ask a zillion questions about, an Indigenous aquaculture initiative on the far south coast of New South Wales, focused on the revitalisation of traditional knowledge to create modern resources using seaweed. Please join me in welcoming both Kataya and Sarah. So I think first I would love to hear just a little bit more about what you do in your everyday. Firstly, about Country Needs People, about what's happening, about what changes you're seeing, and then we can get into the more of that sort of ancient wisdom, modern science part. So Kataya, tell us a bit more about what you do.
As mentioned, I work for a small NGO called Country Needs People. We do a little bit of, not a lot of work in securing long-term and sustainable funding for the Indigenous Ranger program. And then on the other side, where I kind of sit, is the capacity building area of Country Needs People, working with a whole bunch of different Aboriginal communities, supporting them in their aspiration to manage country in their way.
And are you working, along which areas of the coast are you looking at in particular?
I'm working very locally at the moment. We work all over, but specifically I am very, very privileged to work with the Gamay Rangers in the La Perouse community. I've been working with them for the last 4 years, and it's been an amazing journey so far.
So looking at the area that the Gamay Rangers, both in terms of land and sea, is extraordinary. Tell us what changes you've seen there, over the last few years, but I guess over the last decades, and how you can see those changes play out.
So I'll also just preface this by saying that because I'm not from this country, but I can't speak for it, that comes from the fact that my people are far up the north coast, and even then it's, certain people can speak for country. But from a stance that we all know that the Botany Bay area is very industrialised, and there's been so many changes. There was a new port expansion. I know there's been a big community upheaval in terms of trying to stop the new port terminal coming in. I think it's a cruise ship terminal. But just not that, but I think the influx of people wanting to utilise the beautiful area of Botany Bay in the eastern suburbs. So just lots and lots of pressure on our environment, and we've got really, really staunch community members in the La Perouse community that are advocating on a daily basis, trying to make sure that country is cared for as much as we can.
And Sarah, tell us a bit about what you do. Tell us a bit about sort of the changes that you're seeing, and how things are unfolding.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Gorst. I'm the co-founder of a small business initiative called South Coast Seaweed. So my husband and I founded a business around seaweed back in 2020 after the Black Summer bushfires. We'd been working with a couple of non-for-profit agencies for a while, doing seagrass restoration and learning about how seaweed is so important to our oceans. And then one day I started to think a little bit more about seagrasses and how our grandfathers had taught us how you can use different types of seaweed to fish, and how some of it was used for medicine. And I decided that it was really important to go home and have a conversation with my husband, and just say, look, I think we should look at the cultural significance of seaweed in Australia and what that means for our oceans and what that means for our people. And that's how our journey started into revitalising that cultural knowledge around seaweed.
Can you share with us maybe a bit about the cultural significance of seaweed? You talked about how it was used in sort of in fishing, but tell us a bit more about the cultural significance.
Definitely. So seaweed's been used for 60,000 years. There's some beautiful seaweed water carriers and baskets that you can see down in the Palawa Museum down in Tasmania. Unfortunately, along the East Coast, we have lost a lot of knowledge. That's why it's so important to reconnect it. But with seaweed, it is really amazing how it was used traditionally in medicine. So each different seaweed plays a vital role, not only in our ecosystems, but for Aboriginal people and in our daily lives. Some seaweeds were used to sort of gain extra protein or iodine because they're really high in vitamins and minerals, and then others were used for, let's say you had an oyster cut, you could ground that down into a poultice and use it to regenerate the skin.
And how is South Coast Seaweed going? You were talking a bit about starting this, and how's it going? How's that sort of progressing?
It's been an amazing journey over the last 4 years. We've been able to create a range of different food products. So we do seaweed salts, seaweed focaccias and breads. We'd like to look a little bit more into the cosmetic side of things. But we've also been doing sea country foraging tours. So we take people out on country and teach them about sustainable foraging and how seaweed is important for our First Nations people.
You've both talked about knowledge and passing on of knowledge. Can you tell us a bit more about, both from the Gamay Rangers and Country Needs People perspective, how do you pass this knowledge on? Where are you getting this knowledge from, and how, in turn, are you passing it on to make sure that we keep going with the good things and we stop doing the bad things?
It's a really good question. It's also a very complicated one. So I will also speak probably more from a personal perspective. In terms of passing on that knowledge, we've obviously been very much impacted by colonisation, which has fractured a lot of those mechanisms of mob being able to pass on that knowledge. Not that I want to get into the, more trauma side of things, but it is something I think we do need to acknowledge. So in terms of being able to facilitate that transference and that we keep doing that in the right way is seed power. If you are in a position and you're wanting to support mob in being in the marine conservation space, it is literally get out of the way. You can support, you can coach, you can help, but we're not there to, kind of be your spokesperson. But at the same time, communities are doing a lot of repair work, going back out in country, learning their language, reconnecting with elders in their community, and all of these things are really key in terms of those kinship structures and making sure that knowledge is passed down the right way in community. In terms of then, in a more collaborative sense of working with non-Indigenous people, is that, there is, I guess, a curiosity and open-mindedness needed to be able to bring these two groups of people together. And I think also just realising that there was horrible stuff done, but the future is looking really, really bright, and that we've got a plethora of knowledge on both sides, and neither one should be more valued. In that is not to say that our science is the most perfect thing out there, because even its history can be quite dark. But at the same time, there has been a more privileging of the Western science, whereas there's a lot of knowledge that Indigenous communities can tell you that science is playing catch up in a lot of the ways. You've got stories from Western Australia, South Australia, all over, that have basically said, well, this is what this fact is, but science had to go out there and prove it. And that's not, again, necessarily a bad thing, but it has been at the detriment of hearing Indigenous voices. So I will stop there that little rant and give Sarah some space, but yeah.
No, I 100% agree with everything you've said. For us, we were really fortunate in knowledge sharing with other communities and tribal groups. So we, with our business, our small business, we started off with a couple of small pieces of information. And then we were able to connect with Macquarie University, who helped us bridge that gap between science and traditional knowledge, which was really amazing. So we were able to put together a manuscript around the cultural significance of 6 different common species on the far south coast. But then we were also able to use some of the information that we'd known from our family ties, and then do knowledge sharing across different communities across New South Wales. And that's how we were able to gain that knowledge and revitalise that connection along saltwater country.
I know we had, a couple of days ago, we had the Blue Solutions Summit, and a lot of the conversations over today and yesterday have been about solutions. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the barriers you face, some of the challenges, and how people can help overcome those?
Starting with the native food industry, only has 2% of Aboriginal ownership. A lot of the knowledge that we have around eucalyptus and all of our beautiful native ingredients has been taken and commercialised without any acknowledgement of Aboriginal people. So it's really important to support small Aboriginal businesses that are coming into that space. It's just really important to be able to support small Aboriginal businesses in that space, to be able to grow and develop in the same way we would with a non-Aboriginal business. So seaweed is a new industry, and it's really important for us to be able to acknowledge First Nations history and knowledge around this industry, and how can we make sure that they're at the forefront of the growth and development of seaweed in Australia.
Thank you. And Kataya, I will get to Mitch in a moment, but can you tell us a little about some of the challenges, some of the barriers, and how people can help overcome those?
So in terms of barriers, I think there's lots of opportunity, but I think it's a bit of a mindset problem in terms of people want to help, but they're not exactly sure how to. A lot of mobs are starting to put documents out there saying this is what we need assistance with. Those are the things you should be looking for. But at the same time, mobs have lots of internal things going on within their communities and often kind of get bombarded. So it's a balance of you want to support, but you don't want to lean too much on that bandwidth. And if they say that it's not a priority, then that's a no. And that's something that needs to be respected. I guess also there isn't many of us in this space. I mean, I can maybe count on one hand the amount of Indigenous marine scientists that I know of doing similar and different things. And within that comes, there's only so much work we can do and can carry. So it's slow. We want to get in there and do stuff, but it is also give us time.
Thank you. And a late entry to the race is Dr. Mitchell Gibbs, who is a proud Dunghutti man through kinship and lecturer and postdoctoral fellow at the University of Sydney in the School of Geosciences. While you weren't here, Kataya and Sarah covered off a number of different things about their work and what they're doing. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do, about your work, and again, about some of the changes that you're seeing? And then I'll probably come to the audience for questions in a second.
So I work with the University of Sydney. I'm working with the Gamay Rangers and some other Indigenous groups as well, looking at how we can start to bring Indigenous knowledges to the forefront of the academic world, but then also use that for the purpose of really bettering our environment. So making sure that when we're doing habitat restoration, that we're bringing into account the knowledge that we've had in these places for thousands of years or thousands of generations, and be able to then have a much more holistic understanding of the environment and how we should move forward using Indigenous knowledge as a basis, but then really emphasising that with modern technology. So.
And I guess I'd love to hear a bit more about, Kataya was mentioning the Gamay Rangers, but the work of the Gamay Rangers, and what are your some of your priority projects or some of the biggest changes you've seen over the last few years?
So I think the biggest changes I've seen is that the Gamay Rangers are really pushing for a lot more sovereignty over the Gamay itself, and being able to make sure that the community is leading these research projects over government telling community what they want. And so making sure that the community is saying, well, we want to do this with these organisms in these places in this way, that that people are going in and actually listening to that. I think universities and the academic place in general is really starting to see how when we give the reins back to communities, we can really see the importance and the benefit of that. And I was lucky enough to go overseas, and I worked with a lot of communities in America and in Canada, and they've done a hell of a lot of stuff with their communities to then show the benefits that's had for the environments. And when we can start doing that, and unfortunately in Australia we are a little bit behind in the way that we are doing restoration, but when we can start to have community members and communities, elders be that forefront of knowledge, that's part of that, instead of it being I've got a project at, let's say, Sydney Uni, and I've got some money for the Gamma Rangers. It's more like I've got the Gamma Rangers as lead researchers in this project, and so we're moving in the one direction together, instead of just saying that here's some money, do what we want you to do, what we want anyway. Like, yeah.
So I guess just before I go to the audience, what do you need to see change? What do you need to see done differently? You've mentioned that, and Kataya said to literally get out of the way.
Yeah, I would say policy. So in New South Wales, there's restoration or conservation grants that go through the New South Wales government, and very often, in fact, for all fire management practices that start, you have to go to a community organisation or a community around fire management. But with anything marine, you don't. And so that's actually one of the projects I've got with the Gamma Rangers, is making sure that when people go to do work in any sort of marine environment, they're trying to go to the people who know that marine environment.
Questions from across the room. I will come out with a microphone. There's one question there. Hang on a sec.
What do you think the most, I guess, respectful way for non-Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders to learn more from the Aboriginal people of this land would be, especially if you're trying to incorporate it into what you're learning or what you're doing for work?
You can go.
You were late. It's all right.
It's true.
We could do an entire lecture series on that. I think, there's a lot of information already out there. I mean, if you're... I don't know if you're at university or whatnot, but, there's a lot of critical thinking skills in terms of discerning, was this written by an Indigenous person? Was this curated by an Indigenous person? But also, lots of Indigenous communities are doing cultural tours, cultural ecotourism, so there's lots of ways that you can support and still learn. In terms of incorporating, there can be a little bit of a trap there, because we really want to be careful about not cherry picking Indigenous learnings and trying to fit them in systems that they were never made for. So within that, it is also trying to, I think, do a bit of an examination of, like, what's my capacity to give power back to communities who have been historically marginalised. So, if you are in a workplace that might do educational programs, can you maybe bring in somebody who can do an educational talk? Is there a, as Mitch was saying, bringing in knowledge holders and traditional owners that can help design projects from the get-go that are their priority, and also pay them? Yes, Beck, thank you for reminding me. It is also one thing is, if you are going to engage mob, is you need to pay them for their time and their knowledge. It's not enough to just go, hey, do you want to be included? It's not sustainable. You are taking mob away from really important things in order to participate. So just probably the main things I can think of, unless Sarah or latecomer Mitch would like to.
Just let it go.
Yeah. Never.
Also, when engaging First Nations people and communities, it's always being mindful not to just do it during NAIDOC week. Yeah. If you're genuine about the relationship you want to build, don't just ring up, make a phone call and ask for a welcome to country during NAIDOC, because that's not the way to build a relationship in community.
Yeah, and I think going on that too, that a lot of projects, when people have projects, they have them, especially in universities, they have them for 1, 3, could be 5 years, and And it makes it really hard because it takes a long time to build relationships, especially coming from the academic space where Indigenous communities don't trust it to start with because the amount of information that's been taken and then misused and not acknowledged for that either. And so it's not a place that you go and just say, oh yeah, thanks for the info, catch you later. You got to build those relationships and keep them going. Like before I even had projects with the Gamma Rangers, I was going out to see them. I was and this was a couple of years before I even spoke to them about having projects with them, because you need to have that familiarity around the people that are going to be there, not just like, you need to see the fact that when you're working with them, they're seeing you, they're not seeing the university, and then it can really make it really hard to make sure that you can be trusted, and being able to go to those places and for them to see you for you, and then know that what you're doing is actually going to benefit the community instead of just those words, because many people have said them before. So, yeah, all I can say is just, I would rather, instead of email, and just go and see people. So if you want to talk to people, go and talk to them. Like, don't look at a phone, because like a lot of the community members, they have phones, but they don't use them all that time. And if it's a random number, they're going to be like, no thanks. So if you want to see someone, go and see them.
And other questions? Yes, question just here.
I went to an event on Thursday night where they were talking about climate, what's brilliant, what's bullshit, and one of the things, sorry, excuse my language, it was the name of the event. One of the presenters from the Climate Council presented a slide that said, we have the solutions, and they did put on their First Nations custodianship of sea country, but they didn't talk about that. There was no representation on the panel, and I asked about it later, and the scientist couldn't actually answer me on how things are currently looking or what it might look like. And so I was curious to know, what it might look like now or in the future, what kind of things that you'd like to see or are working towards.
That is still a very prevalent problem in this space. As I said, like, people want to help. It's either there is such an urgency to get people in there that they don't take that time to build relationships, as Mitch and Sarah have mentioned. And then also it can just be that there may not be anyone available, but at the same time, that's not an excuse. There are a lot of people starting to come through, young people who are speaking. There are lots of elders who want to speak, but they may not be given the appropriate opportunity to do so. I think, scientists are still really trying to figure out what engagement actually looks like. I think it's a very foreign thing to them, even though it can be as simple as going and having a cuppa and biscuits and a conversation about, hey, do you want to come and do this? And is there anything we can do for you? Because that's the other thing. A lot of communities are always being asked, hey, can you come do this? Can you give your time? Can you do this for us? But at the end of the day, they're never going, hey, what can we do to support you and your community? Is there stuff that we can help build your capacity in? So I think it's slow going, it's getting there. But I think it's just people thinking, going, how do we be more human and build relationships with people, and it's not just transactional at the end of the day.
Yeah, you go. Okay. Yeah, and I think on that, I think scientists also kind of stepping back and realising they don't know everything about that place, and so a lot of communities know a lot about their place, and so when you go to talk to them and you say, oh, look, I'm doing this project, it's like, they're like, cool. Like, what does that really matter to us, kind of thing? And then the scientists come in telling everyone what they know and what's best for them and all these other things. And it's like you're completely disregarding all the knowledge that the elders and everyone have in this place specific. And I should also mention that when we look at Indigenous knowledges around certain or any sort of organisms within that environment, we have to think that the names of organisms change depending on where they go because they have a different interaction within those environments. And so when you go into an environment, we're not looking at it as a, I guess, DNA sort of way of seeing organisms. It's more of a place, space specific, organism specific there. And so when we're able to think about it like that, instead of thinking about it as, oh, well, they're all the same, like you got mullet everywhere. No, every environment's different. That means every mullet interacts with that environment differently. And so understanding that those places are specific, and so the people who know that place the best are the ones that have lived on it for thousands of generations.
We've got time for one last question before we wrap up this panel session. There's a question here just in the aisle. 1 second.
Are Indigenous knowledge in Australia protected by like legal instruments or policies? I'm asking because in other countries, for example, like the Philippines, Indigenous knowledge is kind of like protected by policies, and they're considered as intellectual property. So in terms of you tapping the potential of what could be an Indigenous skill for engineering or for science could be like a bit tricky to engage or use the systems.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Oh, no, you guys are sure?
Do you want to go? You go. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So it can be tricky. A lot of it's because like the ICIP, Indigenous Cultural and Intellectual Protocol, is something that's kind of still forming in Australia. It's not something that has been laid out specific, because when you start changing slightly different, let's say like this morning, I was out at Lapa doing a mullet run with the nets and that, and so that practice has been done for a very long time. But let's say you change it just a little bit, then that might not be then considered their Indigenous practices. But then it's obviously formed from that. And so the ICIP around that gets a little bit grey, I would say. So I think that that's something that, and I'm no lawyer, so, but I think that's something that lawyers and stuff need to sort out, and I think I'll just stay working with the community.
Just very quick add-on. So as I think we've kind of gathered that Indigenous knowledge is very place-based, and the structures around trying to protect that, I think most of the time it's kind of one size fits all, which doesn't work. So it's really quite tricky to kind of figure out how do we protect something that is different, because remember, around Australia there was over 800 Indigenous language groups. So in order to do that from a Western perspective, where we're very one size fits all and, you know, one law for every single situation, that's going to take a lot of time to work out. And I think also those high level intellectual cultural property legislations that are starting to kind of come through, they're still kind of being worked out. How do we actually incorporate them on the ground and grassroots level? Because everything that happens up high doesn't necessarily work on the ground in communities.
We are out of time for this session, but please would you join me in thanking Sarah and Kataya and Mitch for this session.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Ocean Ideas. Please make sure to share it with your networks and help us in our mission to turn ripples of action into waves of change for our blue planet.